To the Crossroads of Ideas. This evening, the title we're going to use is The Future of Academia in a Complex World. So I'd like to welcome you all to my world. I'm Michael Ferris. I'm a professor of computer sciences with an appointment here at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. And I lead Hub Central, of which one of the hubs, the Illuminating Hub, which is a collaboration between WID and the Morgridge, puts on this series of talks. So Hub Central is a collaborative effort within the university and an arm to outreach to and to get in reach from the broader Madison community. And so I hope that at the end of this fireside chat that we're going to have, you will engage in some questions of our distinguished guests here. So I have to tell you that I build mathematical models, and that typically turns everybody off as soon as I say that, but I build mathematical models that inform decision processes in a cooperative and in a non-cooperative setting with uncertain data and with application to problems in energy planning. Think about zero carbon by 2050, environmental concerns, and of course, you know, this is Wisconsin. We deal with problems about cows and fish, right? So some recent work of mine looks at designing, for example, the architecture of green energy systems. And if you're interested in further ideas about that, do come to WID and find out some new ideas about that as we move forward. And these think about interactions between policy, engineering, investment, and design. I'd just like to tell you that today we had the WID Symposium, and we covered a variety of topics. And so you're in the same space where earlier on today people talked about mobile apps for home health care or phylogenetic network design. Somebody talked about the meaning of life, or how chemical systems evolve into biological ones. Another person talked about how do we gain trust for robots. Somebody else talked about cartoon captioning. And the other talked about the connection between your brain and your gut. Now, we've just had our meal, so I'm hoping that my brain is actually working well, even though my gut's still working off the meal. Before I say more about this evening's event, we'll just take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we occupy here at WID is the University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed by when both the federal and state governments tried repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of the Wisconsin ideas, and we're looking at ways to respect the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation and the other 11 First Nations of Wisconsin. Well, I've had a truly inspiring day with all of those different interactions. I believe this is only going to get better. And I would like to, I have the pleasure to introduce Charles Isbell Jr., an American computationalist, a researcher, and an educator. That's my ordering. I don't know that's his ordering, if he would put it that way. Until recently, he was a professor in, and the John P. Imlay Jr. Dean of the College of Computing at the Georgia Institute of Technology. His research interests, which we talked a little bit about over dinner, focus on machine learning and artificial intelligence, particularly interactive and human-centered AI. He has published over 100 scientific papers. In addition to his research work, Isbell has been an advocate for increasing access to and diversity in higher education. On August the 1st of this year, he joined the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the family, as our new provost and vice chancellor of academic affairs. I'd like to say a bit late, but welcome to Madison. Welcome to our nice balmy weather, to WID, and to the Crossroads of Ideas. I was hoping to have a fire here, and I said we could bring one of the candles from the dinner over here, but somebody said it wouldn't last the trade, and instead we're just going to have a fireside chat with an imaginary fire this evening, and we're going to talk about the future of academia in a complex world. I'd like to start by looking at you with the following question, if I can find it. So, the following question. How do you see the future of higher education evolving? And what changes or trends do you anticipate in the next decade?
Or so.
Or so.
Okay, so first off, good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? Let's try that again. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Excellent. So before I answer the question, let me just say how happy I am to be here. We had a conversation about the fireside chat and what it was going to look like, and what we agreed to is that we would have a nice conversation, sort of set the stage. Maybe I would say some unnecessarily provocative things so that you would be motivated to have a conversation with us and ask some questions. So the social contract that I am proposing is that we will talk to one another. We will have a few interesting questions. I will say some things I actually believe, and you will think of interesting questions, and then we will have the conversation, not just up here, but out there. So is that an acceptable social contract? We're all on the same page. Excellent. Okay, so the question is about higher education and the sort of trends that are going on. I think there are two things you have to think about simultaneously. One is bad news, and one is an opportunity and good news. The bad news is that over the last decade or so, we've seen massive loss of trust in higher education by the public writ large. It's worth pointing out that that loss of trust actually reflects a loss of trust in institutions in general. So pick any institution that you care about, whether it's the police, the military, whether it's firemen, whether it's education, pick anything that you're interested in, and you've seen over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years, public trust in it going down. So even though that people sort of trust us less or think that we have less of a value than we used to have, they still think that in general, but we're actually a little worse. So if everyone else has gone down this much, we've gone down faster and a little bit more. So that's an actual challenge. That's what's happening. That will continue because we are now a part of an ongoing political conversation and an ongoing conversation about value, return on investment, lots of other things like that. So higher ed is in an environment and under sort of a particular kind of threat and view that it's not clear what its purpose is in a democratic society like ours. So that's a trend that's going on in the background. And no matter what else we do or no matter what else we say, it is useful to think about the fact that we are in that world. On the other hand, there's lots of opportunities here, particularly at a place like UW-Madison. We're at the same time that we see this sort of loss of trust in institutions generally and in higher ed in particular, we actually see steady increases in people's belief in institutions that have a positive impact on their lives. So when you ask them what they think of college professors, they don't have very nice things to say. But you ask them, well, what about research universities where you have professors working on medicine? Oh, those people are great. What about the ones that are in extension that are coming out and helping me think about agriculture? Oh, those people are great. What about the engineers that are building the new, oh, those people are great. So everything that we do, all the kinds of scholarship that we do, they like. And the reason they like it is they believe that it changed their lives, that we actually care about them as people and that we're not just looking to, they actually think we're all for-profit institutions. They think we're just trying to make money. That's what they think. And when you have them focus on the impact, fundamentally the Wisconsin idea, and actually touching on in the world, they have very strong positive things to say about that nationwide, and actually most especially in Wisconsin. So the background that we have is that we have a country that is increasingly suspicious of us on the one hand, but also believes in the things that we actually do matter. So WID matters, right? The stories that we tell matter when we tell it to them. So that's sort of the background, so I can actually answer your question. Here's the answer to the question today. given that background and given what it is we need to do, given the demographic trends and everything that's going on in the world, the fundamental thing that we have to do to change in the way the university interacts with the world is around thinking about education at scale. It's telling its story and the sort of impact that we do and doing it from sort of the position of elite public university. What is it that we do that changes the world? How do we connect to people in their everyday lives, demonstrate to them that what we're doing is not just for ourselves, but for the betterment of the state, the betterment of the country, the betterment of the world, and how do we reach as many people as possible? Mm-hmm. In a world where technology is changing like this, and you can't go 10 years without having to relearn skills. You can't go 15 years without having to rethink what your job means. It might go away. It might be something new. We have actually not just an opportunity, but an obligation and a duty to think about that notion of our public obligation to the world to help them think about education and to bring as many people in as possible. If you don't do that, then you start to fall off the cliff, you start to fail, bad things kind of happen for everyone. So the big things that we have to worry about is thinking how to take the message of the kind of research we do, the impact that we have on the world, combine it and connect it fundamentally with education and our need to do that at scale, which is the thing I happen to care a lot about.
So what are your thoughts on the role of technology and online learning in higher education, especially in the light of the recent challenges we've had with COVID-19 and the training that we had to do, or the switch to online education? Do you have specific ideas about how you could scale up via online education, or you think that that's not something the university should engage in?
The university absolutely has to engage in it because it's a way of doing teaching at scale. If you allow, I'll tell you a story about something that I did shortly before coming here.
Yep.
So about, I think 10 years ago now, Georgia Tech decided that it wanted to, everybody remember MOOCs? You remember that when that was happening? And we were talking about destroying all of higher education with this sort of massively online courses. You remember all that? Open online courses. It was going to destroy everything. So we decided that we needed to think very hard about what that would actually mean. Not just think about the hype, but think about sort of the promise of the technology, taking computing, figuring out ways to the ways we were connected with one another through telecommunications, connect out in the world and see if we could actually educate people. So here's what we did. We decided to actually create online Masters of Science in Computer Science. Mm-hmm. Why Masters of Science in Computer Science? Because you can do Masters of Science. There's a sort of professional degree there. Computer science seemed like a natural way of doing it. We weren't experimenting with the undergrads, which no one would like, and no one quite knew how to think about that with the PhDs. But at the master's level, it seems like we'd have some possibility. So in the space of about 6 months, we went from idea to actually figuring out what the degree would look like. Very importantly, we wanted to be sure that that degree was the same as the one that you would get on campus. So at the time, we were at a place where we had a degree that was the number 6th ranked one in the country. We wanted to maintain that. We wanted to figure out what that could look like and if we could actually give the same kind of education. We did it. We announced it to the world. Within 2 weeks, we had 3,000 applications. We actually had 3 times the number of applications we were getting for on campus, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. So we pushed on that. And in the course of less than a decade, we went from 0 students to 12,000. Mm-hmm. Not just did we go from 0 students to 12,000, but it turns out that the students we were attracting who were going through this were nothing like the students that we were attracting on campus. So 85% of the students on campus were foreign nationals, 15% were citizens or permanent residents, but for the online it was the other way around. 85% US citizens, permanent residents, and these were people who 97% of them would have never pursued a degree if this option weren't available because they had kids and mortgages, and they lived on the other side of the country, and they couldn't give up what they were doing, even though they really wanted to sort of expand education and think hard about what was going on. Which means that in the space of less than 5 or 10 years, we ended up with a program that, that at steady state, where we are now, is responsible for somewhere between a 1/6 and a 1/5 of all graduate CS degrees in the country, mm-hmm. right? In just that span of time. And we were able to show that not only were we able to attract people who otherwise would have never been able to do this, but at the end of the day, they were just as prepared as anyone going through our on-campus degree.
How did you do the student support for those people who were not around?
So it turns out, so first off, they were older, they were in mm-hmm. a different sort of situation, but the support we built by remembering that we weren't just building classes. What we were building was a program. And you've heard this sort of idea that in design where rather than build everything out, you just leave a green field. and you let people walk through the field and you figure out where they put the paths and where they put, that's where you pave. That's what we tried to do sort of in the virtual way. We put things out there, we followed them, we paid a lot of attention to what their needs were at the level of a program, and then where they went, we followed them. So we met them where they were, we provided support, whether it was advising support or whatever they needed. We gave them the platform so that they could build affinity groups in whatever ways that they wanted, and we supported them where they were, and they came out on the other end. Lots of evidence that the ones who found community did well, the ones who did not found community were less likely to do well. We tried to provide various kinds of support for sort of flexibility in their life, and it worked very well. They did just as well as their on-campus students, actually slightly better. They looked very different in terms of their background, and they went out, they got jobs, they turned around what they were doing, or they switched careers, they did whatever they did.
And it didn't cut into your normal.
Not at all, because there was no overlap. And by the way, an important thing here is that we decided to accept every single student we thought who could succeed. So our acceptance rate was about 85%. Now, just to put that in context for those of you who don't think hard about it, if you look at public universities, about 5 years ago, Georgia Tech, just to talk about Georgia Tech for a moment, became only the third public university with an acceptance rate below 20%. So it's Berkeley, UCLA, Georgia Tech, and there's a giant gap in everyone else. So we were in a world where we took prestige. We took how good we were by how many people we could say no to, right? My old dean used to tell this joke that the way you told the difference between a good university and a bad university is that at a good university, they did sort of minimal damage to people as they kind of went through, right? You take good people, you say no to people who don't necessarily need support, and it turns out they come out fine on the other end. The real test of education, the real test of a university is, can you take people and give them what they need so that they're better at the end of the day? They learn more, they built connections, they're able to do things they couldn't have done before that they wouldn't have been able to do without you. So we decided, rather than an acceptance rate of 7%, which is what we were doing roughly at the time, we were going to accept every single person we thought we could see, because we didn't have an excuse. In the old world, you had an excuse, because this is the biggest room you've got. You can only accept 400 people. But if they're online, you can accept as many people as you want. So we did that. I think we were able to kind of demonstrate that it worked, and that people who you would have never accepted because you just didn't have the room, you gave them the opportunity, gave them the support, listened to where they were, they would be able to do fine. We did that through online. But actually, you're asking me the wrong question. And the reason you're asking me the wrong question is because you're focusing on the word online. Yeah. That is a means to an end. The real question to ask ourselves is that, how do we do education, research, support, programs, all of those things at scale? And how do we do it in a way where people have to be distributed across both space and time? Online is a means to an end, but it is not the end itself. And so I think the challenge before us, to tie this into your first question as well, is to understand how the University of Wisconsin-Madison, or any other elite public research university, could and can and must reach 20,000 undergrads coming in every year instead of 8,000, 100,000 students, 200,000 students. There's more than enough people out there who could be educated, and more than enough people there who are yearning for it and would be capable of it if we were able to give them opportunity. How do we do that on the one hand without losing who we are fundamentally? That is a difficult question, but it is the question of the 21st century for a university like this one.
Is there anything that you can take away from your experience at Georgia Tech that could actually illuminate how you're going to do this, or how you're going to encourage us to do this at the University of Wisconsin?
You do exactly the same thing. You embrace the idea that the mission, what it means to do live out the Wisconsin idea as an educational matter, is to educate as many folks as possible, and to trust that they're able to do that if you give them the support that they need. I have to be clear here. I'm an old man. So when I say the support that they need, I don't mean, hold their hands and, tell them they're really nice people or whatever. I mean, give them the opportunity to succeed, and just enough room so that they can fail in a way that they can come back. So we're not doing the work for them. We're not taking away all of the difficult choices. We're giving them enough of an infrastructure and support so that they can explore and get in on the other end, and give them the flexibility they need to do that. If you do that, then most of them will be fine. I mean, we went from a world where we only thought 7% of people could get through, to a world where 85% of people with bachelor's degrees in English and no formal work in computer science, they get a master's of science in computer science, in the top 10 ranked place. Once you realize people are capable of doing that, if you give them the opportunity.
Without satisfying the academic rigor, is what you started off with saying.
Yeah, and there is no difference in the 2 degrees. It's not written down anywhere. There's nothing about the way that we admit people with respect to minimal standards and all the rest of it. It turns out that people given the opportunity and given enough support will do it.
So at scale, so we have to worry about it at scale. If I can switch gears slightly, there are lots of people here from the community, and so I'm wondering whether you have an opinion on, I'm sure you do have an opinion, but what role does the university play in fostering innovation and entrepreneurship, both on and off campus? So how do you think the university should engage with the local community and entrepreneurs and the economic well-being of Wisconsin?
Well, I mean, I suspect that it would surprise no one to know that what I think is that, first off, it must do that. This is not an option. It is fundamental to the nature of any university, and certainly the kind of research university that we have here, to engage with the world around it. The problems that we care about are big, right? They're big things that require working with people outside the university itself. So you must engage with the community in order to do that. But also, if you don't engage with the community, you don't actually understand what the problems are. You end up creating a world just for yourself and solving a problem that doesn't actually touch anybody out in the real world. So you have to find ways to engage with them. You have to find ways to take the innovation that you're doing for the sake of learning and inquiry and innovation inside to touch without the rest of the world. You have to do that.
And where does trust come into that? Is there some mechanism? Is there a trust relationship that you have to build up? Going back to your first point that you made right at the beginning.
That's an excellent question. The answer is yes. You have to build up trust over time. Although once you have that trust, you can continue to build on it. The way I think about it, and I talk to my colleagues about this all the time, that trust requires that you don't see yourself as going out into the community and fixing their problem. We are not coming in and telling you how your life would be better. We're communicating and working together, understanding what the problems are. So I come in and I change you, but you change me, right? You have to go in with your expertise, yes, and the problems that you care about, yes, but you also have to go in with a fundamental notion of humility, that you are going to learn something through the process and do better science and do better work as a result. And if you do that honestly, then everybody sort of wins. And that's how you build up that trust. This is not people from the outside coming in. We're not carpetbaggers. This is proof that I'm from the South. We are not carpetbaggers coming down and telling you what to do. Rather, we're building a community together.
Okay. So again, I think it's not a switch for me now, but thinking about the research at this research-focused university as well as the education effects, what's your take on how AI should be incorporated into UW-Madison? And it's fairly open-ended, so I know you have strong opinions on AI, but how should AI be incorporated into this machine, which is the University of Wisconsin?
In every single way possible. So let me tell you the way that I think about AI. So I've been doing AI for a very long time, long before it was popular. I feel like, it's an indie band that I've been following around the country, and now it's hit it big, and nobody was there for the first album, and it's kind of annoying. But it's something that I've cared a lot about. Here's my view of AI. You can, rather than ask me the question about AI, you can ask me the question about computing. Mm-hmm. Or computers and computer science. Like, what does that mean? AI is just computing. It's computing in a very particular way, but that's all it is. So now think about the question this way. How should we use computers? How should we use information? How should we use computation in a university, both in terms of educating people, but also in the way that we analyze what we do and look at what we saw? When you ask the question that way, well, it's obvious. You have to use it in everything. Why? Because what do computers do? Computers allow you to do the things that you want to do faster and more efficiently. They allow you to scale, fundamentally. Mm-hmm. They allow you to count to 1 billion like that, where you couldn't do it before. They allow you to look at data you would never be able to look at in a human lifetime. They multiply your effect. AI is just what happens when you take that and you marry it with analysis. When you marry it with data and build models about the way the world works of various sorts. There's lots of technical details there. Anybody who does this for a living, trust me, I know that you have to take derivatives and all that, it's fine. But what it's doing at the bottom level, what it's actually doing is it's taking that computational power, marrying it with data that we can now get that we couldn't get 30, 40, 50 years ago, and using it to build models and to make predictions. But that's just computers. That's just computing. So there are two things. There's two answers to your question. One is you have to take computing as it is now expressed with AI and fundamentally integrate it in everything that you do, including the way that you educate people. And that's one answer. And we can talk about it in detail. We have to do it about the way that we analyze students and know when people are drifting off and be able to do interventions. We need to be able to do it to analyze patterns in the way that we admit students and who succeeds, ways in which we reach the most people to do educational outcomes, to model the way that we do experiments, look at the way that we look for tumors in lungs. I mean, all the ways that you would do that. We have to integrate it in the sort of obvious ways. But there's another answer to your question, which I think is actually, for me, more fundamental and important, which is that the way you think about computing, the way you think about AI, and what makes it interesting, is you don't think about it just as a tool that you can apply. You think about it as a way of thinking. Right? That the reason computing, computer science, data science, whatever label you want to call it, is important is that it is a new kind of discipline. And the reason it's a new kind of discipline is because it's a different way of thinking. So when you express the question in one way, and you say, well, how can I integrate this in? What can I do? You start thinking about it as tool sets. Right? Then you start saying, well, we have to build educational models. We have to figure out how we can train people in it. So you start thinking about it as skill sets. But fundamentally, what it brings to us is a mindset, a way of thinking about the world and describing it that allows us to see problems in ways that we wouldn't have been able to see it without this, and then be able to come to solutions that we'll be able to implement that we otherwise would not have been able to implement. If you're an engineer, right, you think about demonstrably superior technology. There's an engineering mindset that allows you to think about trade-offs fundamentally, and that way of thinking is important. If you're coming as a philosopher or as a humanist, you think about argument and what does it mean to be able to demonstrate that something is likely true. If you're a scientist, you come up with a way of thinking about discovery and of validating and falsifying hypotheses, right? It's a way of thinking that matters. Computing is a way of thinking about abstractions and automation in the world that we did not think about 150 years ago. And by doing that, we're able to build systems and do things that allow us to see a problem that you could have never seen before, that the biologists could not have seen because they didn't have a notion of computation inside cells. And so now that we think about it that way, we can do all kinds of nice things around virology, for example. Okay. The important thing about how you get computing and AI into the environment as educators or in your research is to remember it's a way of thinking and to to integrate that in to the way that you teach people and you educate people.
Should we do this as a college? You come from a college of computing at Georgia Tech. I'm in a computer sciences department. Should we do this as a college of computing, in your opinion?
So he is now asking me a political question that I am unable to answer, so I will sip my water.
Okay.
Make sure it's water.
Oh yeah, make sure it's water. And what I will say is the arc of history is long, and it bends towards colleges of computing.
Okay. Could you share with us the top three things that this university could do or should do to foster interdisciplinary research?
I'm going to answer a different question. I'm going to tell you why I'm going to answer a different question.
Okay.
Because the answers that popped into my head don't get at what really needs to happen. So I'm going to answer this question. What is the one thing that we need to do?
Okay.
So some of you, I know some of you out there are professors, some of you are paying attention, your staff, some of you are perhaps students, your friends, you're paying attention to what's going on. And you're going to hear, if you haven't already, about all these great initiatives. We're doing innovation for the public good, as the chancellor would say, which the chancellor should say. It is central and core to the Wisconsin idea. But you're going to be hearing about big initiatives in hiring, big interdisciplinary hiring, so that we can solve big problems. You're going to hear about budget models and thinking about efficiency. You're going to hear about new ways of thinking about modeling research at scale, education. So you're going to hear all of these things. And as you hear these things, if you're paying attention a lot or if you're just occasionally dipping in, I want you to remember a simple thing. We are only doing one thing. The one thing that we are doing is we are taking this great university, and make no mistake, this is a great university. It's a giant aircraft carrier, and we're taking that and we're moving it from here to here. And the reason we're moving it from here to here is because we want to set it up to be the elite public research university of the 21st century. That's what we're doing. What does it mean to be the elite public research university of the 21st century? What does it mean to matter in 2030 as opposed to 1930? What it means is to take the great breadth of this place, all the work that is done here, the education that is done here, policy discussions that are done here, and turn it towards a modern interpretation of the Wisconsin idea, which means solving big problems for the world. It means thinking about what does it mean to be resilient as the climate changes over the next several decades. What does it mean to take AI and integrate it into the way that we teach and the way that we do work? What does it mean to think about privacy and ethical considerations around security? What do all those things mean? How do you solve these big problems? The answer to that is, if you decide that's what you're doing, then you are forced to think in terms of interdisciplinary problems. Because the answers to all of these things require that the medical practitioner for healthy aging works with the people who think about policy, the engineers who are building systems, but also with the computer scientists who are thinking about ways of gathering data and building systems, to do prediction or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's not possible to solve the big problems unless you make everything interdisciplinary. But if you're going to do that, then you have to rethink the way that you hire. You're in computer science, right? Mm-hmm. You are separate from data science and separate from information science, even though you're part of a larger school. So the walls between those departments have to go away. But the walls between computer science and, the School of Nursing also have to go away. Right. The School of Human Ecology has to be talking to the School of Ed and has to be talking to CS and DS and everyone else in order to solve these big problems. You got to hire 60 people across 15 different departments in order to have a hope of making a dent into the problem of pick whichever big major problem you want to think about.
So do we want to break down these colleges and these departments and go to a model where everything is centers, or do we want to centers around topics, or is that
you want to do both, right? You want to create structures where young faculty, staff, students can learn something coherent, on the one hand, but also are able to flow between different problems and pick up the things that they need in order to solve these big interdisciplinary problems, which means you have to think about the way you do hiring in a way that's different from perhaps the way that you have in the past. You have to think about the way you do education. You have to think about the way that you do tenure. You have to think about all of these things that encourage as opposed to simply not punish what it means to work across different disciplines. So there is no one answer, right? Just making things truly interdisciplinary actually requires changing 10 different things. It requires changing, I'm really getting in the weeds here, it requires changing the budget model, which if anybody has any trouble falling asleep later tonight, come to me and I'll explain to you how budget models work in universities. It's kind of insane. It'll startle you, and then I'll start talking about spreadsheets and you'll sort of doze off. We have to change those around incentives. You worry about these kinds of things. I do game theory myself. We have to worry about how you build incentives to make it easier for people to do the right thing and hard for them to do the wrong thing. But then you also have to change the way education works. I'm not just getting a degree in math or getting a degree in physics. I'm getting a degree in experience across multiple sorts of degrees, and it's okay because it prepares me for some particular problem. I've got to be entrepreneurial, because I have to take these ideas and try to innovate them quickly, even as I'm doing basic science that may not result in anything particularly visible for 2 or 3 decades. You have to find ways to manage the diversity and the heterogeneity of those sorts of things. So I can't pick 3 things. I can pick the one thing, which is to make certain that our North Star is to think about the Wisconsin idea in the context of changing big things. And the only way to do that is to do this, that, the other, and so on, in every way that you need in order to move you towards supporting that idea.
I didn't hear what the this, that, and the other was.
Well, we'll find out, won't we?
Good. So, do you have a strategy for enhancing this, or a strategy that you think that would be good for the university to do? So I'm thinking to some extent about, if we have AI, there's a national initiative to actually generate AI research resources. Mm-hmm. Should we try to become part of that initiative, or should we build something locally here that serves to build this excellence within our local community, or should we be part of the national initiative?
Yes. You should do both of those things. And in fact, the second thing helps you to do the first thing. The first thing brings resources in so that you can do the second thing, or the first, whichever one of those orders.
Yeah,
right. You have to, if you believe the idea that you have to work across various disciplines and that the problems that need to be solved have to be thought of at scale, then you have to start thinking in scale. You can't think 1 or 2 PIs at a time. By the way, for those of you who enjoy being 1 PI at a time, it's perfectly fine. It's nice to have a diversity of things that we can all support and that we can all reward and believe in. But some of the people are going to need to do big things and work across with teams of 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 or 60. That's going to require a lot of resources. It will involve building things here, but it'll also involve working with other universities, working with national labs, building big centers around which you can do this kind of great work. So yes, we're going to have to do that. And in order to do that, we're going to have to think about ways to support people as they try to do these big projects. Not just hiring more faculty, it's hiring staff, it's hiring systems to support bringing people together and giving them the opportunity to take a little bit more risk than you might otherwise have taken in a world where, in order to get from assistant professor to associate professor with tenure, I need to publish 3 papers in the right journal and 73 conference, or whatever that is, conferences at this. And I'm very narrow. I have to figure out a way to support people so that they do get rewarded for the patents that they generate, the companies that they spin out while doing scholarship, for sure. The way that they bring in students who work across multiple disciplines. It's a top to bottom, left to right.
Generalizing the metrics that we're using for evaluation. You know, I'm an optimizer, so I always want to know what the metric is so that I can optimize that metric. And you're saying that the metrics that we have to evaluate, that the people within our university have to be broader as we go forward.
Absolutely. And they have to allow for differences in excellence. You have to articulate it, but you have to talk about differences in excellence. So in my world, just for a little bit of history, a long time ago, people who were getting computer science degrees were looked down upon by their engineering and science peers because we published in conferences instead of journals. So for those of you who know the difference, you're like, oh, and you're like, well, that's silly. For those of you who don't, it's silly, okay? It's absolutely silly. There's a group of people who believe that the correct mark of peer review had to be done through journals, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And there are lots of communities that do that today, and it makes a lot of sense. But in a world where you're in a field where things are literally changing every other month, which is a world that we're living in now, and we've been living in for a long time, the time horizon for publishing, getting the reviews and getting it out there was too long, and so conferences kind of got invented for that field in a way where you do get the kind of peer review and the fast turnaround that you do to know that the work that you're doing has some validity and some merit. But you had to convince people that that was okay. And once you convinced people that was okay, then you were able to grow and do the kinds of interesting things that you were able to do. There's some equivalent. I don't know what it is, but there's some equivalent. Maybe it's patents, maybe it's software downloads. It's impact and impression on the world. It's people adopting the things that you do in order to start companies or build systems. There are ways of, the thing that we care about is impact, right? So we have to figure out how to measure impact in a way that's consistent with scholarship and excellence. And those are going to require new metrics and new ways of thinking without giving up on the core fundamental idea. So you mentioned the metrics, right? So the problem with metrics is you know, the thing you measure becomes the only thing that matters. Right. And you decide the number of papers is the only thing, and you forget what it was supposed to capture. What it was supposed to capture was impact and excellence. There are lots of ways to have impact and excellence besides journal articles or conference papers.
Trade-offs.
And you have to figure out what those things are, and you have to have these honest conversations.
Yep, cool. So I want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but I have the hardest question that I wanted to ask you.
Great.
So I note that you have a collection of over 23,000 comic books and a keen interest in funkadelic music. Mm-hmm. And the question I was going to ask you, first of all, was what role did art and the creative spaces play for you and your plan into the sciences? You can answer that if you like, but the other question I had is that last night I watched your latest video, Means Without a Cluster.
Yes.
With Professor Michael Littman. This was a nice listen, so if anybody you want to go and see this, it's called Means Without a Cluster. But the difficult question is, who is smooth and who is curly and why?
So there are a couple of music videos out that I happen to be in. They are parodies of other songs. Or homages. Say they're homages to other songs. One is Michael Jackson's Thriller. I play Vincent Price, as you can imagine, in that one. And the most recent one is Means Without a Cluster, which is a take on Smoking Out the Window. For those of you who are you know Smoking Out the Window. Well, Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak, right? And so I sing.
My wife's a voice teacher, by the way, so she listened as well last night. So.
And I do not need to hear.
If you need any pointers, I can give you some of those. Right.
I never said I could sing. What I said is that I'd be willing to be recorded, and so that's what I did. So as a part of this online program that we did some really interesting things. One of the things, a good friend, Michael Littman, who you mentioned, and we've been friends for a very long time. He does machine learning and AI as well, and he has a strong interest in education. When we decided to create this program, I wanted to do my machine learning class, but I wanted to do it with him, which was impossible because he was in Providence, Rhode Island. I was in Atlanta, and then we realized, but wait, we could record this. Like, it's going to be online. We could just do this, and we have a production team. We could do whatever. So we decided to create a sort of tag team teaching that was more like a podcast. So what would happen is one of us would be the instructor, one of us would be the student. You just see our hands as we just kind of wrote things around. I'd give a lecture, and the other person would ask questions, sort of playing the role of the student. The professor would do preparation and figure out, what exactly they were going to do, set up quizzes and those kind of things. And then the person being the student would come in with no preparation at all. So, it's just like regular class. And we would have this kind of back and forth, and we would have these arguments and these kinds of discussions, and it was a lot of fun. So we started doing that, and in a section on game theory, we decided to talk about prisoner's dilemma.
Yep.
And he said, okay, so you've got two criminals. And he goes, what kind of criminals? I said, well, are they smooth criminals? And so he started singing Smooth Criminals by Michael Jackson, and so I drew a little picture of him with little curly hair, because he has curly hair, and then a picture of me shaven with a goatee. Is very, very nice likeness. And we decided to call him Smooth and Curly. And somehow the students latched onto that, and we became known as Smooth and Curly out in the world as we made videos and did various other things. So Smooth and Curly Productions. So if you look up Smooth and Curly, Mean Without a Cluster, just remember I never claimed I could sing. And it turns out that auto-tune needs some more AI. But I did the best. The best that I could.
Cool. I just when you talk about game theory, I use do Prisoner's Dilemma in my classes, and in Prisoner's Dilemma, there's another video which is done by Jasper Carrot, who's an English games show host, and there's something called Golden Balls. And so if you watch this, this is kind of an interesting take on Prisoner's Dilemma problem. Okay. So if you want to educate yourself about game theory, that would be something you should also look at. But look at Means Without a Cluster. It's really a good video, I thought. So is there questions that let's go with questions from the audience, and I will.
Microphone's over here.
Yeah.
Well, I got no problems being first. Provost, thank you for sharing your thoughts tonight. I have a question for you about applied research.
Okay.
When I saw that you were coming here, I immediately said, yes, he gets it, given that you're coming from Georgia Tech, GTRI. Mm-hmm. So, University of Wisconsin has a very proud history as one of the nation's elite public universities, and it was only 20 years ago that we were number 2 in the nation in R&D, behind only Johns Hopkins. And then we were in the top 5, and then we were 6, and now we're 8. Mm-hmm. And I believe one of the areas where our peers have shifted focus is on research on applied problems, national security problems in computing, AI, cybersecurity, and other fields. Where do you think the University of Wisconsin's position should be for the future on that?
So I really appreciate the question. Just for a little bit of context for those of you who are wondering what GTRI is, it's Georgia Tech Research Institute. It's the applied research arm of Georgia Tech. To give you a sense of what that would mean, let's see, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, Georgia Tech is now the largest research university by research expenditure in the country without a hospital. So the only ones that do more research than Georgia Tech are those with hospitals. Places with hospitals generate a lot of research and a lot of funding. Even with those, Tech is still 20. Tech wasn't even in the conversation 15 years ago, 20 years ago, with respect to sort of that kind of size. But it has grown during that time, mainly, and almost of the $1.3 billion, $1.4 billion worth of research expenditures, the vast majority of it, or the significant majority of it, is through GTRI, which is indeed applied research in exactly the areas that you're talking about. I think that's interesting, and I think it's interesting because to your question about being number 2 and then being number 5 and then being number 6 and being number 8, is you have to recognize that it's not that UW-Madison got worse. It's that other people ran faster because they saw the way the world was changing. So insofar as Wisconsin wants to continue to move up the herd rankings, they want to think about having a bigger research footprint. It's about thinking about where the problems are, where the opportunities are, and then building structures to support that. And it will follow from there that you move from 8 back to 6, back to 2. No one's ever going to be Johns Hopkins because they cheat. They've got this whole thing, but they'll get back up to 2. I mean that in a good way. You'll get back up to 2. What I think is important is when I said earlier we're only doing one thing, that is the switch, right? Thinking about big interdisciplinary problems, fundamentally solving those problems requires thinking about applied research as well as basic research. Increasingly, those lines are getting blurred anyway, and I think for good reason, particularly in the fields that you're talking about, because what it means to be innovative there is to deal with sort of the real world that's out there in front of you. So you got to build infrastructure to do that. But if you're going to build infrastructure to do that, what does that mean? Yes, you have to do lots of hiring, you have to do these big interdisciplinary things. Maybe you create your own GTRI, or maybe you take the structures that you already have. Unlike Georgia Tech, Wisconsin-Madison is a big place across lots of disciplines that already has the infrastructure in-house to make that kind of switch without spending 20 years building a sort of parallel infrastructure. So one of the things that you're doing is you're thinking about your vice chancellor of research as a person who is dedicated to doing that, as opposed to dedicated to seeing the dean of the grad school and thinking carefully about things that are happening internally. You need lots of people doing that, but you need someone who is elevated and dedicated to doing that kind of work and bringing people together and building the incentives so that people can do interesting things, going to Washington, doing all the things that you have to do to make that work. So what we are going to do are the things that we are doing, which is having embrace the idea that we need to do this shift towards thinking about these big problems that allow us to do cool things. We have to build the infrastructure to support that with the way that we think about research at scale and so on and so forth. And I think that it will, ask me this question in 2 years when we've got the people in place, we're doing the things, we're supporting, we've hired 120 more faculty than we might have otherwise. We're doing all of those kinds of things. Ask me how it's going then. I think the answer is it'll be going quite well, because it's not that we're changing what we're doing in a fundamental way. We're taking the things that we already do well, and we're doing more of it, and we're trying to unlock that potential by focusing on these big kinds of problems, applied or otherwise. The thing is that they're central and they matter and they're big. Does that help?
Somebody should take note, and we should invite back in 2 years' time to see whether we're ready.
We'll get there.
Another question?
I can imagine that your first few months here at the University of Wisconsin have been full of challenges as well as opportunities. One of the things that I'd like to explore for a moment with you is, have you had a chance to understand what is the University of Wisconsin system and the remote campuses that we have in various cities around the state that provide a tremendous opportunity for students who maybe aren't able, either financially or with their grades, to get into this university, but still can enjoy a 4-year educational opportunity at some of these other campuses. Those opportunities have been radically shifted by lack of funding or removal of funding from our current legislatures, and they are bleeding jobs and professors in areas that we were historically seen as a wonderful university system. And certainly it extends far beyond just the Madison University campus. Have you had a chance to understand what that is, and what are your takes on what could be done to keep a sense of that whole university system in place?
Well, so I think, I appreciate the question. I think that yes, we have a system. We continue to have a system. It's gone through some challenges, like everybody else in the country, in part because of demographic shifts and in the college-age population and a host of other things. Where I came from, my last job, there was a university system of Georgia. It had 32 universities when I joined. By the time I left, it was down to 23, mainly by merging various sort of universities together in some ways that have happened here over the last several years. I think that the system is itself a strength, right? The universities, some of them are very mission-oriented, which is what you need and what you want. And a lot of them are great partners with each other and, of course, serve the needs of their local community and across the state. Depending upon where you are, you get people who specialize in one thing or the other. It makes a lot of sense regionally. I think that it would be a mistake for Madison to think of itself as being alone in this process, but must think of ways of doing partnerships, both for geographic reasons, but also for honest to goodness research and educational reasons, and partner with the rest of the state. I will say that even as the news sometimes seems dire because of just structural things that are happening in the economy and in the sort of leveling off of population, you have seen places like Milwaukee turn into a Research One university. So we used to be the only Research One university at this place, the true flagship in the kind of traditional sense of the word. But we have a Research One partner in Milwaukee, which you couldn't have said 10 years ago, right? Which means that the possibility of educating people across the state and neighboring states and people who want to come here and bring their kind of expertise and spend time and settle in the state has the potential to go up, as opposed to the inevitability of having it go down. So I think the system remains important. I think Madison is an important part of it. We do not, when I have conversations with the chancellor and with the president of the system, who sits right over there, we understand that we're working together as a system. So I think that will have to continue to be the case. I'll also point out we get 1,000 transfer students every year, a little more than 1,000 transfer students every year. Most of them are coming from other parts of the system. So we cannot be strong without the rest of the system being strong, and certainly the rest of the system can't be strong without us being strong. You just sit in the lanes where you sit and you work together and build on each other's strengths. So yes, the system is important. Yes, we're a part of it, and we don't think that we can succeed without the entire system succeeding.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one or two maybe questions. There's one at the back over there. Right.
Thank you very much. You talked about the aircraft carrier. You talked about scale, and I'm wondering, as computers have shifted from those colleges of computings to our laps, to our pockets, to our wrists over the last several decades, how can we both shift that large scale thing, but also support the access to tools like AI? The GPTs just announced the Jill Watson, move it from Jill Watson at the College of Computing to Jill Watson on my wrist in my pocket at the university. Is that a viable way to access scale in a non-centralized manner?
Well, it's not just a viable way, it's the only way. I mean, fundamentally, the power, what's interesting about sort of the history of computing over the last several decades is exactly that. It went from being gigantic machines that would fill up a room like this and need their own air conditioning system to, like this is more powerful than anything anybody had in 1952 or whatever. I'm trying to pick a date that was before I was born, 1952, right? This is amazingly powerful. Actually, this is the newest phone, so it's actually awesomely powerful. It's kind of cool. My watch is incredibly powerful, right? Think about all the power that you have here. By the way, it's not just you have all the power here or the power on your wrist. You're actually surrounded by computation, like at all times. There's sensors everywhere. Your car is basically just a giant computer with wheels and, in my case, a battery. Tom and I have Teslas. We talk about this all the time. He has a really nice one. Mine's the Plaid. It goes from 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds, and the fastest production car on the planet. I know that isn't what you wanted to that's what you asked me, but I just wanted to point that out. So, yes, it's the distribution that is actually the power, and the reason that distribution is power is it's power for two reasons. One is it's where the data comes from, and it's what allows us to personalize the AI model or whatever to you. And because we can bring computation down to something that's this size, we can actually do the computation locally. So we can actually do fast things without having the network go or having to do computation very, very far away. That's actually very powerful for a lot of reasons, not the least of which, and one that we often tend to forget, is because of privacy and security. If we can keep the things on you, then we can do really interesting things that you otherwise would not want anyone to do. So yes, that is the future, and it's in fact what we're going to have to do to make AI interesting for those of us who want to use it every day.
One last question at the back here.
It might be too early in your tenure at Wisconsin to answer this, but when it comes to distance education, what's our edge? 'Cause it seems like 10 years ago, there was an opportunity when MIT and Yale and Georgia Tech and many other institutions were building their distance education programs. Now those are established and people go to them. And in Wisconsin, in person, I think our edge is that there's pride in the state about their local school, which is fantastic. And traditionally, our very, very best students have been ones that are from Wisconsin. But you don't have that online. They can go any place. So how do we build an edge?
So it's a great question. One of the things that really amazed me about the experience at Georgia Tech is we were actually able to create that culture. And the sort of secret sauce, other than the technical detail and the commitment to it, was recognizing that our goal was not just to educate, but to educate in a way that was specifically Georgia Tech. I can tell you what that was like. I was an undergrad there, so I have a sense of it, give you kind of a hint of it. And when I'm walking down the street, if I'm wearing Georgia Tech paraphernalia, people do not ask me when I graduate, they ask me when I got out, right? Because that's Georgia Tech. They get out, they don't graduate, right? It's a kind of view of the place as a crucible. We used to say, Georgia Tech building tomorrow the night before, right? There's all these kinds of things about drown proofing. There's all these things about the place that made it specific in who it was, and found ways to translate that. I think in Wisconsin, there's a culture here. There is the Wisconsin idea on the one hand, but there's also the breadth of the place. And here's the thing that's true about Wisconsin that isn't true hardly anywhere else as far as I can tell as a university. People double and triple major here. The barriers to this are low. The way that students kind of grab onto that, it's just done with ease. You don't do that at lots and lots of places. It's just not a thing that you think about. There are reasons for this. Some of them are structural. Many of them are cultural. Those kinds of things, the Wisconsin idea, the fact that you can be at Cal's and worry about agriculture, and you can do computer science, and you can do history all in one place, and you can try to bring those things together, is not completely unique, but is absolutely a distinctive feature of this place. And figuring out how to take that and similar things and translate it to the distributed environment of education is going to be the edge that this place has over others. It's not impossible. It's not even difficult. You just have to be deliberate about it, because naturally it's what you're gonna wanna do, just because it's what you do. So just remember not to lose that. I'll leave you with this little bit of story, just this kind of evidence that it can be done. So when we started this program, I was, the only thing I worried about is that we wouldn't have enough TA support. We'd have 10,000 students and we wouldn't be able to get enough TAs. And I was just hoping that if we grew like this, we'd be able to grow fast enough so that we could kind of keep up to it. Something happened that I never expected. And I don't even think it's obvious in retrospect. We had people wanting to TA for us while they were in the program, and in year 3 of the program, because we were doing 2 classes at a time, and then year 4 of the program, and then when they graduated, when they got out. In fact, when I left, You have 12,000 students enrolled in any given semester in this one program. 19,000 total if you include the other two programs that got created. I'm just thinking about 19,000. Each one taking on average 1.3 classes, multiply 19,000 by 1.3, you get a whole bunch of seats. You have one TA per 50 students. That's a lot of TAs. Over 50% of all the TAs in the program on the day that I left were students who had graduated. So these are people who graduated, went out in the world, clearing 6 figures while living on the West Coast. They have a mortgage, they have kids, they have full-time jobs. And they are TAing for this program for minimum wage. Clearly they're not doing it for the money. It doesn't make any sense. And you've all been students, and for those of you who have been professors or TAs, you know how irritating it is to deal with people asking you, but I need to get my 2 points back, or whatever. And they're doing that. And by the way, they're 30, 40 years old. These aren't, 19-year-olds. These are people who, have other things to do, and they're doing it. And I asked them why. Why are you doing this? They said, because this program changed my life, and I want to find a way to give back. Which I know you feel that way. You think about this place, and you think, I want to give back. Alum come, they get out, they come 20 years later, and it's like, I'm at a place now where I can give back to this place and I can support it. Whether it's WID, whether it's LNS, whether it's SOHI, whatever. What happened there is we created something that was of value to someone, something that aligned with their vision of what it meant to get an education, gave them an opportunity, and they gave back. The first thing was what was important. Wisconsin has built into it a fiercely loyal group of alum. It has a network across this country that, frankly, as much as I appreciated this place, I didn't truly appreciate until I came here and started meeting people. You can recreate that because that's culture and that's people. So if you remember, as you build these broad systems distributed out in the world and they're online, that as a professor, as a TA, as friends, you are building people connections, and you continue it to be community, to be Washington, to be Wisconsin. You will end up creating the environment that keeps the edge that you already have. My view is this, when you ask, go back to the very first question, the great university is the one that is a hometown, one that you want to return to again and again and again. So whatever it is you're building, whatever it is we're building together, whether it's research, applied research at scale, whether it's education, whether it's a new vice chancellor of research, whether it's a college of computing or whatever, the important thing to keep in mind is that you're building a hometown, a community. Your chancellor is not CEO, your chancellor is mayor, right? You are not students, you are not just alum, you are citizens. And if we all remember that, then we'll keep the edge that is Wisconsin, and we'll do just fine.
So on that note, I'd like to thank the provost for a lot of interesting and forthright discussion that we've had throughout this evening. I thank you for your honesty and for your vision, and also for the interesting ideas. And my request to have this talk again in 2 years' time is just because I'm excited about some of the ideas that have been put forth in this discussion. And I'd just like to have everyone here join with me in thanking Provost Isbell for a great and wonderful.
Thank you.